I used to think the worst kind of betrayal was being cheated on. That you could trace pain to lipstick on a collar, a late-night text, a guilty look across the room. But I was wrong. The deepest betrayal is when your pain is met with calm. When your discomfort is brushed aside with a smile. When the person you love most wraps a dagger in the word loyalty. Then tells you you're crazy for bleeding. My name is Lauren. I'm 28. And this isn't just a story about a marriage that failed. It's a story about a marriage that never had a chance to begin with. Because from the very beginning, I was never the only woman in my husband's life. And no, I'm not talking about an affair. At least not in the traditional sense. There was another woman. Let's call her Fiona. His best friend. His childhood neighbor. His soul twin, as he used to say. And for years, I told myself it was harmless. That I was being irrational. Insecure. That if I loved him enough, trusted him enough, I'd eventually get used to her. That's what he always said. Fiona's just blunt. She's an acquired taste. But now I know. You don't acquire poison. You just get better at pretending it doesn't burn. By the time he moved into her bedroom, in my own house, I was already used to the ache. But let me take you back to when all of this started. To the very first red flag I ignored. The one that looked a lot like a wedding toast. And sounded like a woman calling my husband the love of her life in another universe. Have you ever felt like the third wheel in your own relationship? Let me know in the comments, because maybe it's not just me. Part 1. The woman who was always there. They say you can't compete with history. But no one tells you what it feels like to marry a man who left his heart in the past, and swears it's just friendship. When I met Ethan, I thought I'd won the lottery. Smart. Funny. The kind of man who pulls out your chair and remembers your coffee order even when you forget your own. But from the very beginning, there was always someone else at the table. Her name was Fiona. He called her Fi. Said they were childhood best friends. Neighbors since kindergarten. The kind of friendship that outlives braces, breakups, and broken bones. She's family, he said. She was there before anyone, and she'll always be. I laughed the first time he said that. Back then, I thought he was being poetic. Now I know he was setting the terms. The first time I met her, I wore soft pink lipstick and my favorite white blouse. I remember double-checking my eyeliner in the car mirror. Because I wanted her to like me. I wanted her to see me as someone who wasn't a threat. Instead, the first words out of her mouth were, "Wow, all that makeup just to impress me?" She smiled when she said it. Like it was a joke. But it wasn't. It was the first cut, subtle, quick, and designed to look harmless. She didn't stop there. Every dinner, every party, every moment she entered the room, she made sure I felt like the outsider. Like she was the one who belonged next to Ethan. And I was just temporary. She'd tease me about my voice, my laugh, my taste in movies. Once, when I wore a sundress to Ethan's birthday dinner, she leaned over and whispered, "You know Ethan's type is dumb blondes, right?" I smiled, but inside, something cracked. When I brought it up to Ethan later that night, he brushed it off with a chuckle. "That's just Fi. She doesn't mean anything by it. She's just blunt. You'll warm up to her eventually." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. Because Ethan was everything I ever wanted in a man, except for this. Except for her. His parents didn't help either. His mother adored Fiona, always referring to her as my second daughter. His father joked that Ethan and Fi should have gotten married years ago if they weren't so damn stubborn. Even his sister once pulled me aside and said, "Just a heads up, you'll never come first, not while she's still around." I laughed it off, told her she was being dramatic. But something about that warning stuck with me like a sliver in my ribs. I kept telling myself it was fine. That their bond was harmless. That every man deserves a best friend. But it didn't feel harmless when Ethan would cancel plans with me because Fiona had a bad day. It didn't feel harmless when he'd light up reading her texts and then put his phone face down when I walked into the room. It didn't feel harmless when he missed our first Valentine's dinner as a married couple. Because Fiona had the flu. "You're not being fair," he said that night. "She doesn't have anyone else." But I was supposed to be his someone. And yet every time I cried, every time I questioned it, I was the jealous one. The overthinker. The emotional wife who just couldn't handle a man having a female friend. What made it worse was how normal he made it all seem. How he turned every red flag into my problem. How his love came with fine print I wasn't allowed to read. Looking back now, I realize I was never in a marriage with just one person. There were always three of us. Me, Ethan, and Fiona, his shadow. His comfort. His constant. But I didn't walk away then. Because I was still clinging to hope. Still thinking that one day, he'd finally choose me. It took something far more twisted to wake me up. Because when Fiona lost her marriage, she didn't just come to us for comfort. She came with boxes. She came with her pain, her pride, and her unspoken expectations. And my husband? He opened the door wide. Next part 2. The uninvited guest. When sympathy turns into invasion. Grief has a way of making people blind. But sometimes, it makes them selfish. When Fiona's marriage fell apart, I'll admit, I felt sorry for her. She'd tried for nearly a year to get pregnant. Month after month of heartbreak. Until one day, the doctor looked her in the eye and said the word no woman ever wants to hear. Infertile. Her husband left not long after. Filed for divorce. Said he wanted a real family. And suddenly, Fiona was alone. No husband. No future. No child to hold. I'll never forget the day she came to our door. Her eyes were red. Her hair undone. Her voice hoarse from crying. She looked like someone who had been swallowed whole by grief and spat back out. And of course, Ethan let her in. Because, how could we not? "It's just for a few days," he said. "She just needs space to breathe." I told myself it was fine. I could handle this. I was strong enough. Empathetic enough. After all, what kind of woman would I be if I turned my back on someone broken? So I opened our home. But what I didn't realize was that Fiona wasn't just moving in with a suitcase. She brought baggage of a very different kind. Within 48 hours, our house no longer felt like ours. She didn't like the living room curtains, said the color was too depressing. She swapped out my candles for less artificial scents. She even changed the kitchen layout, moved the coffee mugs from the left cabinet to the right. "It just flows better this way," she told me, as if it were her house. It wasn't just the home she rearranged. She inserted herself into every little crevice of our routine. If I turned on my favorite show, she rolled her eyes and switched the channel. When I made dinner, She pushed the salt shaker toward Ethan and said, "He likes it more seasoned. Don't you remember?" She knew how to make me feel like a stranger in my own space, without ever raising her voice. And Ethan? He didn't say a word. He called it, giving her control in a world where she had none. But what about me? What about my world, that she was tearing apart, piece by piece? One afternoon, I came home early and found the two of them on the back patio. She was crying again. He had his arm around her. She looked up at him, whispered something I couldn't hear. And he laughed. Laughed like I hadn't heard him laugh in weeks. They didn't see me standing there. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't his wife anymore. I was just the woman who paid the bills and cooked the meals. Even the people around us started to notice. Our neighbor, Mrs. Elkins, sweet older woman, always pruning her roses, stopped me in the driveway and asked, "Is everything okay, dear? I saw your husband carrying a mattress into the guest room yesterday." I blinked, faked a smile, and whispered, "Must have been a misunderstanding." But it wasn't. It was the beginning of something worse. I tried to talk to Ethan, tried to reason with him. Told him that Fiona could go live with her parents. That I was drowning in her presence. That every word she spoke felt like an attack dressed in silk. But he looked at me and said the words that made my blood run cold. "She's not strong enough to be alone right now." And what about me, Ethan? What about your wife? Was I strong enough to watch my marriage rot from the inside out? Was I just supposed to be the collateral damage in Fiona's emotional fallout? I started losing sleep, losing my appetite. I found myself crying in the shower just to hide the sound. And still, he didn't see me. Because he wasn't looking anymore. By the end of that second week, I wasn't living in a home. I was living in a performance. A stage where I was cast as the villain. And she? She was the fragile flower everyone had to protect. But what they didn't know, what no one seemed to see, was that Fiona wasn't weak. She was calculating. And she was about to take the final step. One that crossed a line I would never forgive. Because the day I came home early from work, and found my husband moving his things out of our bedroom into hers, that was the day I stopped asking for explanations and started giving ultimatums. Next, part 3. Lines crossed. The night he moved into her room. There's a certain kind of silence that follows betrayal. It doesn't scream. It doesn't sob. It just sits there, heavy, dense, like smoke after a fire. That's the silence I walked into the night everything changed. I came home early from work, exhausted. Head pounding. Hands still stained with printer ink. The house was too quiet. No TV. No murmurs. Just movement. I stepped inside and heard shuffling coming from the guest room. Fiona's room. That's when I saw it. Ethan. My husband. The man I had shared a bed with for 4 years. Was folding his sweaters. One by one. Placing them gently into the dresser Fiona had been using. He looked up and smiled. Like he'd just painted a wall or organized the pantry. "Hey babe," he said. "You're home early. We were just settling in." I turned my gaze toward her. Fiona was perched on the edge of the bed. Barefoot. Grinning like this was all normal. Her eyes lit up like a child showing off a new toy. That's when I realized. She wasn't grieving anymore. She was winning. I asked to speak with Ethan alone. He looked confused. Then, without missing a beat, said, "You can talk in front of her. She doesn't mind." Of course she didn't. She'd spent years listening to conversations that were never hers. Why stop now? I asked. Calmly, too calmly. Why he was moving into the guest room. He shrugged. Fi's been having panic attacks at night. She says waking up alone makes them worse. I figured, being close might help. Close. In the same room. At night. My heart didn't break. It fractured, quietly. Neatly. Like a porcelain cup hitting carpet. I stared at him. At her. And for a second, I wondered if I was invisible. I told him no. Firmly. Clearly. You're my husband. You sleep in our bed. Not hers. And he laughed. He actually laughed, like I was being absurd. She's like my sister. He said. You're overreacting. And Fiona? She had the audacity to nod. As if my reaction was the problem. As if I was being dramatic for not wanting my husband to share a room with another woman. In my home. I wanted to scream. To throw something. To break every glass in the kitchen just to make them see how this felt. But instead, I smiled. And that scared them more than anything. I told them I understood. That they could have the room. That I supported their little arrangement. Ethan beamed. See? I told you she'd be okay with it. They went back to arranging furniture. Like they were nesting. I walked upstairs. Opened my drawer. And pulled out the deed to the house. Because here's what they forgot. This wasn't our house. It was mine. I walked back down. Leaned against the doorway of their little sanctuary. And said, Are you two finished unpacking? Fiona smiled. Yeah, looks perfect. I nodded. Great. Because you're about to start packing again. She blinked. Ethan frowned. I pulled out the deed and dropped it on the dresser. This house is in my name. You're both guests here, and I'm revoking your invitation. The silence that followed wasn't the silence of confusion. It was the silence of power shifting. Ethan stuttered something about being reasonable. Fiona started crying, again, calling me cruel, insecure, heartless. But I didn't flinch. Because in that moment, I wasn't just a wife. I was a woman who had finally had enough. I told them both. If you need each other so badly, go build a life. But not under my roof. Not under my name. And then I watched them leave. Fiona was crying so hard she dropped her keys. Ethan picked them up. Still didn't look at me. They left like thieves. Not of money or objects. But of years, dignity, and belief. I stood at the door for a long time after it closed. Long enough to hear the echo of their footsteps fade down the driveway. And for the first time in weeks, I could breathe. But I wasn't prepared for what came next. Because sometimes the people who hurt you the most don't leave quietly. They send reinforcements. Next part 4. The gaslight parade, when everyone turns against you. I always thought the hardest part of leaving would be the goodbye. But no one warns you about what comes after. The silence. The judgment. The slow erosion of your character, one whisper. One text message at a time. The morning after I kicked them out. I made coffee the way I like it, extra strong. A touch of cinnamon. I thought, maybe I could finally breathe. Maybe this was what peace tasted like. I didn't even make it to the second sip before the messages started. First. From Olivia, Ethan's cousin. Hey, I heard what happened. Are you okay? I mean, Fiona's going through so much. Was it really necessary? Then from Tyler, our mutual friend since college. Yo, Lauren, I get that you were upset. But kicking your husband out for helping someone with anxiety? Bit much. Don't you think? Bit much? Was I too much for drawing the line when someone crossed into my marriage, my bed? My sanity? By noon, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Dozens of messages. Some subtle, some not. One even said, "If you really loved Ethan, you'd understand his loyalty. Fiona's practically his sister." It was like watching strangers rearrange your life, re-editing it without your permission. Suddenly, I wasn't the woman who held on for too long. I was the villain, the cold wife, the insecure woman who couldn't handle a friendship. But I knew better. I knew Ethan had fed them this narrative, one conversation at a time. I could see it in how all the messages echoed each other. Same phrases, same sympathy for her, none for me. It wasn't just gaslighting anymore. It was a campaign. Then came the final blow. His mother called. A woman who once called me, her daughter with or without the ring. She didn't ask how I was. Didn't ask why I made the choice I did. She just sighed and said, "You always had a hard time sharing him. Didn't you? Even with family." Family? That woman had treated Fiona like royalty from day one. She once told me to my face that I could learn a thing or two from how Fiona carried herself. And now she was implying I was the problem, because I couldn't stomach watching another woman replace me in my own home. That night, I turned off my phone. Not because I was weak, but because I was done defending what should never have needed explaining. I sat alone in the dark. My wedding photo still on the mantel. I stared at it, remembering the vows. Remembering how Ethan had cupped my hands, looked me in the eye, and said, "I choose you. Every day. Every time." But he didn't. He didn't choose me when Fiona mocked me. He didn't choose me when she cried in his arms. He didn't choose me when he moved his things out of our bedroom. And now, he was choosing his pride, by turning the world against me. I thought maybe, just maybe, he would let this end quietly. But instead, he wanted to win. He wanted the last word. He wanted to be the victim. So I gave him what he never expected. I filed for divorce. And the moment he was served, the silence came. The buzzing stopped. The messages stopped. Even his mother didn't call again. Because now they knew I was serious. I wasn't just the bitter wife anymore. I was the woman who walked away, and meant it. But just when I thought it was finally over, he came back. With tears. With promises. With all the words I once begged to hear. But this time, I wasn't sure if it was love. Or damage control. Next part 5. The final choice, her or me. Sometimes, closure doesn't come in the form of an apology. Sometimes, it comes when you give someone the choice. And they still don't choose you. It had been a week since I filed for divorce. 7 days of silence. 7 days of no Ethan. No Fiona. No texts. No fake apologies. And just when I thought he might actually let go, he showed up. It was a Sunday. I had just finished grocery shopping. Alone. Something that used to feel small, but now felt like a declaration of independence. I came home to see him waiting outside the front door. Same hoodie I used to steal when I got cold. Same shoes he wore to our first date. But the look in his eyes? That was different. He didn't knock. Just stood there. Like he was waiting for me to say something first. And I did. "What are you doing here, Ethan?" He didn't speak right away. Then finally, quietly, he said, "I miss you." I'm sorry. I stayed silent. He stepped closer. I didn't realize how far things had gone. I thought you'd understand. I never meant to hurt you. Never meant to hurt me. Isn't that what they always say? He followed me inside. Sat down on the couch. Hands shaking slightly. I watched him, wondering if this was finally real. If this was the man I fell in love with. Finally waking up. And then he said something that almost made me laugh. I still believe we can fix this. If we both apologize, we can start over. Both apologize. That's when I knew, he still didn't get it. I stared at him. And for the first time in our marriage, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just asked. If I told you the only way I'd stay was if you never saw Fiona again? Would you do it? He blinked. Like I'd spoken a language he didn't understand. The pause was long. Too long. He ran a hand through his hair and sighed. She's my best friend. Lauren. She's been through hell. I can't just abandon her. I nodded. But you could abandon me? His eyes darted away. That was all I needed to know. It wasn't about loyalty. It was about comfort. Fiona was his constant. His ego. His safety net. And I was the one who demanded more than blind devotion to the past. I stood up, walked to the mantel, and took down the last photo of us together. As at our wedding. Him holding my waist. Fiona in the background, smiling like she'd won something. I turned to him and said, then go to her. Be with her. But don't ever come back here thinking I'll wait for second place. He didn't argue. Didn't beg. Just looked at me like I'd broken his heart. As if mine hadn't been shattering piece by piece for years. He left quietly. Didn't even close the door all the way. And I just stood there. Finally alone. Not lonely. Not abandoned. Just alone. And free. But closure doesn't always come when the door closes. Sometimes, it comes when the truth finally walks through it. Because days later, he came back. But this time, not to win me back. This time, he came to tell the truth about Fiona. And it was so much worse than I thought. Next part 6. The real betrayal revealed. What he told me after it was too late. You think the worst has already happened. You survive the humiliation. You survive being replaced. You survive the moment they don't choose you. And just when you start to rebuild. Just when the silence becomes your friend again. They come back. With the truth. And it cuts deeper than anything they ever did to your face. It had been almost 2 weeks since I told Ethan to leave for good. I hadn't heard from him. Hadn't seen him. Hadn't wondered what he was doing. Because for the first time in years, I didn't care. Until he came back. Again. It was late. Nearly 10 p.m. I was in my pajamas. Folding laundry. Humming along to a song I didn't even know the lyrics to. And then the doorbell rang. I froze. Because you always know who it is before you even look. I opened the door. He was standing there. Eyes red. Hair disheveled. Wearing the same hoodie he wore the night we first kissed. He didn't ask to come in. He walked in. I was ready to scream. To throw him back out and slam the door behind him. But then I saw it. Real pain. The kind that doesn't want pity. The kind that finally understands what it did. He sat on the edge of the couch. Head in his hands. Shoulders trembling. And I heard the words I never thought would come out of his mouth. You were right. About everything. He told me it happened just days ago. He'd been at his parents' house. Still staying there. When Fiona came into his room. She had been quieter than usual. Strange. Almost expectant. She sat on the bed, leaned against his shoulder, and whispered, "Now that she's gone, maybe you can finally see what's been right in front of you all along." He thought she was joking. Tried to laugh it off. But she didn't laugh. She tried to kiss him. When he pulled away, she said, "I've waited. I've always waited. I was there before her. I was there when you cried after your first breakup. I was there when you got promoted. I was there when you thought no one else understood you. And you still chose her?" He said he felt sick. Said he told her to leave. They argued. She screamed that he'd led her on for years. That he used her for emotional support and then threw her away. She packed her things that night and left. Went back to her parents. And now he was here. To tell me I wasn't crazy. To tell me that all those moments I questioned, doubted, spiraled, were real. That I wasn't insecure. Wasn't possessive. Wasn't wrong. That Fiona had always wanted him. And he had always been too blind, or too cowardly, to see it. He said he hated himself. Said I was the best thing that had ever happened to him. And I believed him. But it didn't matter. Because the truth came too late. The damage had been done. Not just to us. But to me. To who I used to be. To the woman who once stood in front of a mirror and practiced smiling. Just to be likable enough for his best friend. I looked at him, this broken, shame-ridden version of a man I once loved. And I didn't feel rage. Or even satisfaction. I just felt peace. The kind of peace that comes when the ghosts finally speak. When the shadows are named. When your reality is finally validated. He apologized. Truly. And I forgave him. But I didn't take him back. Because forgiveness isn't an invitation. It's a release. I don't know where he is now. And I don't care. I'm rebuilding. Not just my life. But my voice. My sanity. My self-worth. Because I was never asking him to choose between me and Fiona. I was asking him to see me. And when he couldn't, I finally chose myself. I don't know if there's a right way to end a story like this. But I do know one thing. I'm not the same woman who started it. I used to think that love meant loyalty, no matter the cost. That if I just held on a little longer, fought a little harder, he would finally see me. But what I've learned is this. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. Not out of bitterness. Not out of hate. But out of love. For yourself.